The coffee in Greg Holland's cup had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't notice. His eyes stayed fixed on the viewport of the exploration ship Frontier as it drifted through the empty darkness between stars. 3 months into humanity's first deep space mission, and every day brought the same view. Nothing but black space and distant points of light that never seemed to get any closer. Greg was a lieutenant commander, though the title felt meaningless out here. Back on Earth, ranks and medals meant something. Out here, 47 light years from home, he was just another person on a ship full of dreamers and scientists who thought humanity deserved a place among the stars. He was 32 years old, had served in the Earth Defense Force for a decade, and had never imagined he would be part of something this important. He heard footsteps behind him. Kate Sullivan joined him at the viewport, her own coffee steaming in her hands. She was the communications officer, younger than Greg by 5 years, with bright eyes that still held wonder despite 3 months of seeing nothing but empty space. She had graduated top of her class from the Communications Academy in Tokyo, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had volunteered for this mission the day it was announced. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, settling into the seat next to him. Greg shook his head. "Keeps hitting me that we're actually doing this. Humanity's been dreaming about the stars for thousands of years, and here we are, actually traveling between them." Kate smiled, that familiar expression that lit up her whole face. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about watching the moon landing when she was a girl. She said everyone thought that was just the beginning, that by now we'd have cities on Mars and colonies around other stars. She lived to see the Mars colonies before she died, but she never stopped asking when we'd go further." "Took us longer than we thought," Greg admitted. He took a sip of his cold coffee and grimaced. "But we got here eventually. That has to count for something." The ship hummed quietly around them, a sound so constant they barely heard it anymore. The Frontier wasn't much to look at, really. A cylinder of metal and ceramic 300 meters long, powered by a fusion drive that pushed them to about 12% of light speed. Inside were 93 people, the best and brightest Earth had to offer. Scientists, engineers, pilots, doctors, and soldiers like Greg who were there to protect them all if something went wrong. No one really expected anything to go wrong. Space was big and empty. The odds of running into anything dangerous were basically zero. They'd been told that in training, read it in the mission briefings, heard it from experts who'd spent decades studying the cosmos. The universe was vast and silent and probably very, very empty. That's what everyone said anyway. The alarm shattered the quiet at exactly 4 in the morning, ship time. Greg's coffee cup hit the floor, brown liquid spreading across the observation deck as he and Kate ran for the bridge. Emergency lighting painted everything red. Crew members stumbled from their quarters, pulling on uniforms, voices sharp with questions no one could answer yet. The corridor was chaos, people shouting, asking what was happening, demanding explanations that didn't exist. Captain Linda Morrison was already at her station when Greg arrived, breathing hard from the sprint. She was a tough woman in her 50s who'd served in the Mars conflicts back when Earth and the colonies weren't getting along, when people were dying over water rights and mining claims. She had a scar across her left cheek from a piece of shrapnel that had nearly killed her, and eyes that didn't miss much. Greg had served under her during the last year of the conflicts and trusted her more than anyone else on this ship. "Report," she snapped as Greg took his position at the tactical station. "Unknown contact on long-range scanners," said Danny Martinez from the engineering station. He was a big man with steady hands and a mind that understood machines better than people. His fingers flew across his console, pulling up data streams that made less sense the more Greg looked at them. "It appeared out of nowhere about 2 minutes ago, just materialized on our screens, moving in our direction at incredible speed." "Define incredible," Morrison ordered, her voice flat and controlled. Danny's fingers moved across his console again, pulling up numbers that made his face go pale. "Faster than us. A lot faster. It's accelerating without any visible propulsion signature. No heat bloom, no particle emissions, nothing that makes sense according to known physics. At current speed, it'll intercept us in 6 minutes." The bridge went silent except for the soft beeping of various stations and the hum of the life support systems. Everyone knew what this meant. They'd found something, or something had found them. After 3 months of seeing nothing but empty space, they were about to make contact with something that moved through the void like it owned it. "Sullivan, open all communication channels," Morrison ordered, her command voice cutting through the tension. "Every frequency we've got. Standard first contact protocols. Let's show them we're friendly." Kate's hands were shaking slightly as she worked her panel, but her voice came out steady and professional. "Channels open, Captain. Broadcasting the prepared message now on all bands." The message was simple, designed by humanity's best linguists and mathematicians. Mathematical sequences that any intelligent species should recognize. Prime numbers counting upward. Basic physics constants. Images showing Earth's location in the galaxy, our solar system, our species. A peaceful greeting from humanity to whoever might be listening, whoever might be out there in the darkness with them. 4 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. The unknown contact kept coming, unwavering in its approach. Greg watched it on the tactical display, a single blip moving with impossible precision through space. No course corrections, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Like it knew exactly where they were and exactly where it was going, like it had been looking for them specifically. "Captain," Danny said quietly, his voice tight, "I'm getting readings on its size now. It's big, really big, at least 3 times our mass, maybe more. The scanners are having trouble getting a solid lock. Whatever it's made of, it's not showing up clearly on any of our instruments." 2 minutes. Greg could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, could hear the blood rushing in his ears. Around the bridge, the crew sat frozen at their stations, hands hovering over controls, eyes locked on screens. This was it. The moment humanity had wondered about for centuries. The question that philosophers and scientists and dreamers had debated endlessly. Are we alone? First contact with an alien intelligence. The proof that Earth wasn't the only world that had figured out how to ask questions about the universe. 1 minute. The contact was close enough now that the Frontier's external cameras could see it. Morrison pulled up the feed on the main screen, and everyone gasped in unison. Several people actually stood up from their stations without thinking, drawn forward by what they were seeing. The ship was beautiful in a cold, terrible way. It looked like someone had taken a piece of a star and shaped it into geometric perfection. Crystalline surfaces caught and reflected light that seemed to come from nowhere, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The structure defied easy description, existing in too many dimensions at once, angles that shouldn't be possible with 3-dimensional geometry. It was massive, dwarfing the Frontier the way an ocean liner dwarfed a rowboat. Looking at it made Greg feel small in a way he'd never experienced before. It stopped exactly 1,000 kilometers away. Precision was unnerving, mathematical in its perfection. No human pilot could have matched it, no computer system Earth could have calculated it so exactly. It simply stopped, from impossible speed to perfect stillness in an instant, as if inertia was a suggestion it chose to ignore. "Still no response to our message," Kate reported, her voice barely above a whisper. She was gripping her console so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Nothing on any channel. It's like they're not even listening." Then it happened. Not through the radios or the communication systems or any of the carefully designed protocols humanity had prepared. It came directly into their minds, bypassing every technological barrier like they weren't even there, like the very concept of privacy or individual thought was something these beings had never encountered. Information flooded into Greg's consciousness, images and concepts and feelings that weren't his own. All around the bridge, people cried out in shock, hands pressed to their heads, some falling to their knees. The presence that touched their minds was vast beyond description, ancient in a way that made human history feel like a heartbeat. Greg could feel the weight of billions of years pressing down on his thoughts, could sense the depth of experience and knowledge and power that existed in whatever was communicating with them. It was like standing next to an ocean and suddenly understanding that every drop of water contained its own universe, its own infinity of complexity. Words formed in his mind, though they weren't really words in any sense he understood, more like pure meaning being translated into something his human brain could process without breaking. The translation was imperfect. He could feel that, like trying to describe color to someone who'd been blind from birth. We are the collective assembly. We have watched the galaxies turn for 3 billion of your years. We have seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a shore. We maintain order where chaos would reign. We guide the worthy and correct the unworthy. We have witnessed the birth and death of 10,000 civilizations. Greg wanted to speak, to respond, to ask 1,000 questions that were suddenly burning in his mind. But his voice wouldn't work. His body wouldn't respond to his commands. None of them could do anything but listen, frozen in place by a will that made their own seem like whispers in a hurricane, as the presence continued its pronouncement. Your species has been observed. Your world was marked when your first electromagnetic signals reached beyond your atmosphere 73 of your years ago. We have studied you from that moment. We have watched your development. We have analyzed your potential for galactic citizenship. We have measured your technology, your biology, your society, your minds. Hope flickered in Greg's chest despite the overwhelming nature of the contact. They'd been watching humanity, studying them, measuring them for something. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was humanity's chance. Maybe they were about to welcome Earth into some great galactic community, share their knowledge, help humanity join the cosmic stage. You have been found inadequate. The words hit like a physical blow. Greg felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. He saw Kate grip her console tighter, saw tears starting to form in her eyes. Danny's mouth hung open in shock. Captain Morrison's face had gone completely blank, the kind of expression people got when they were protecting themselves from something too painful to process. Around the bridge, crew members sat in stunned silence, the hope of first contact turning to ashes in their minds. The presence continued, each statement feeling like a judge reading out a carefully prepared sentence, cold and final and absolute. Your biological forms are fragile beyond measure. A simple impact destroys your vessels and scatters your bodies into the void. Radiation sickness kills you slowly from the inside. Temperature extremes end your existence in moments. You require constant sustenance or you weaken and die. Your bodies fail and break down after mere decades of function. You are not built for the void between stars. You are creatures of a single world, suited only for that world. Greg felt anger rising through his shock, hot and defiant. Yes, they were fragile compared to whatever this was, but humans had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They'd crossed oceans and climbed mountains and built cities. Fragility hadn't stopped them before, but the presence wasn't finished, and it clearly didn't care about his anger. Your technology is primitive, barely beyond the level of controlled fire. This vessel you travel in is slow, inefficient, and vulnerable to even minor cosmic events. You crawl between stars at speeds that waste generations while others leap across the galaxy in moments. You use chemical reactions and controlled explosions like children playing with stones. Your computers require physical components that degrade and fail. Your communications are bound by the speed of light, making coordination across distance impossible. You are children playing with tools you barely understand, pretending at sophistication you cannot achieve. Someone behind Greg made a choking sound. He didn't turn to see who it was. His eyes stayed locked on the crystalline ship on the screen, that perfect geometric nightmare that could apparently move through space like it was nothing. Your society is fractured beyond repair. You divide yourselves by arbitrary lines drawn on your world's surface and call them nations. You war over resources that could easily be shared with minimal effort. You let some of your kind suffer in poverty and starvation while others hoard wealth beyond any possible need. You cannot even agree on how to govern a single planet, yet you dream of claiming the stars. You are not unified. You are not prepared. You are not ready for what exists beyond your small corner of space. The words kept coming, relentless and cold, stripping away every defense, every argument, every pride humanity had built up over millennia of civilization. Your lifespans are insufficient for the scale of the universe. By the time one of your generations gains wisdom and understanding, they die and their knowledge must be painfully learned anew by the next. You forget your own history with disturbing regularity. You repeat the same mistakes your ancestors made, learning nothing from the past. The journey between stars takes longer than your individual lives can sustain with your current technology. Even if you could travel faster, you would age and die before reaching destinations that others cross in moments. You are too brief to matter in the scope of galactic time. The presence paused. In that silence, Greg could feel the weight of their judgment settling over the bridge like a burial shroud, heavy and final. He wanted to argue, to defend his species, to point out all the things humanity had achieved despite their limitations. But what could he say that would matter to something 3 billion years old? The universe is not for such weakness. The void between stars does not care for your dreams or your ambitions or your hope. It will crush you, break you, scatter your atoms across the endless dark. This is not cruelty we speak. This is not opinion or judgment based on malice. This is truth, simple and absolute. You are not ready for what exists out here in the darkness. Finally, Captain Morrison found her voice. It came out rough, forced through a throat tight with emotion, but it was steady. "What do you want from us? Why did you come here?" "We want nothing from you," the presence replied, and Greg could almost feel something like pity in the words, though that might have been his imagination trying to find humanity where none existed. "We give you a gift, the gift of truth, the gift of understanding. The gift of limitation acknowledged. Return to your world, tend to your gardens, build your cities, live your short lives in peace and safety. Do not venture beyond your star again. The galaxy is not yours to claim. The universe is not yours to explore. This is our mercy. This is our kindness." "And if we refuse?" Morrison demanded, her voice shaking now, control slipping as anger took hold. "What if we decide that our dreams matter? What if we choose to reach for the stars anyway?" Presence's answer was cold and final, delivered without emotion or hesitation. "Then you will learn the hard truth that mercy rejected becomes justice delivered. We have ended civilizations that refuse to accept their place in the cosmic order. We have watched empires burn themselves out reaching for heights they could never achieve. We have observed species destroy themselves pursuing goals beyond their capacity. We offer you the chance to avoid that fate. Accept our judgment. Remain in your system. Live. The alternative is not one you wish to discover. The alternative is darkness and silence and the cold embrace of the void." The presence withdrew from their minds like a tide pulling back from the shore, sudden and absolute. The sudden absence left everyone gasping, hands pressed to their heads, several people crying out in pain or shock or relief. Greg felt tears on his face and didn't know when they'd started falling. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. He felt hollow inside, like something essential had been torn out of him. On the main screen, the crystalline ship began to move. It didn't turn or accelerate the way human ships did, with visible thruster burns and gradual changes in velocity. It simply started moving, faster and faster, accelerating at rates that should have torn it apart. Within seconds, it was moving at speeds that made their fusion drive look like a child's toy. Within a minute it had vanished from their sensors completely, gone like it had never been there at all, leaving them alone in the dark once more. The bridge stayed silent for a long time. People sat at their stations, staring at nothing, processing what had just happened. Some were crying openly now. Others looked angry, fists clenched, jaws tight. Most just looked lost, like they'd been shown something too big to understand and were still trying to make sense of it. Greg became aware that Kate was standing beside him, her hand gripping his arm hard enough to hurt. She was shaking, her whole body trembling like she'd been out in the cold too long. "Greg," she whispered, her voice so quiet he barely heard it, "did that really just happen? Please tell me that was some kind of hallucination, some kind of space sickness we all experienced together." He didn't know how to answer. His mind kept replaying the words: inadequate, primitive, fractured, insufficient, weak. Every weakness humanity had, every limitation they'd struggled with throughout history, laid out like a dissection specimen, examined and found wanting by beings who'd watched galaxies being born. Captain Morrison's voice cut through the silence like a knife. It was steady now, hard as iron, the voice of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. "All stations report. I want full diagnostics on every system. Check for damage, interference, anything unusual. I want to know if they did anything to this ship besides talk." People moved mechanically, falling back on training because it was easier than thinking about what had just happened. Reports came in one by one, voices flat and professional despite the emotional devastation everyone was feeling. Life support normal, navigation normal, engineering normal, communications normal, everything was fine. The ship was fine. Nothing had been damaged. The encounter had left no physical mark at all, just scars on their minds and hearts that would probably never heal. "Set course for Earth," Morrison ordered quietly. "Best possible speed, we're going home." No one questioned the order. No one suggested they continue the mission. The mission was over. 3 months to get out here, 93 people risking their lives to explore the unknown, and they'd be turning around after one encounter that lasted less than 10 minutes. But what else could they do? What else was there to say? The universe had spoken, and its message was clear and brutal. Humanity didn't belong out here. The stars that had seemed so welcoming just an hour ago now looked cold and distant. Hostile, even. Like they'd always been closed to humanity, forbidden territory, and they'd just been too stupid and too arrogant to realize it. The journey back to Earth took 3 months, same as the journey out. But everything was different now. The crew moved through the ship like ghosts, pale shadows of the excited explorers who'd left Earth with such hope. Conversations were quiet and brief, often trailing off into uncomfortable silence. The excitement that had filled the frontier on the outbound journey was gone, replaced by a heavy depression that pressed down on everyone like a physical weight. Greg spent his days at his station, staring at tactical displays that showed nothing but empty space, running through scenarios in his head that went nowhere. What if they'd said something different? What if they'd responded with more confidence? What if they'd argued their case better? But it wouldn't have mattered. He knew that. The collective assembly hadn't come to have a conversation or a debate. They'd come to deliver a verdict that had probably been decided long before the frontier ever left Earth. Kate stopped by the observation deck sometimes to stand next to him in silence. They didn't talk much anymore. The easy friendship they'd developed during the outbound journey had been damaged by what they'd experienced, weighed down by shared trauma. What was there to say? The universe had spoken, and its message was clear. Humanity didn't belong out here. They were too weak, too primitive, too brief to matter. 2 weeks into the return journey, Danny found Greg in the mess hall, staring at a meal he wasn't eating. The food tasted like cardboard lately. Everything did. "You know what bothers me most?" Danny said, sitting down across from him without asking permission. His voice was quiet, contemplative. "They were right, about all of it. That's what I can't get past." Greg looked up from his tray. "What do you mean?" "We are fragile," Danny continued, his engineer's mind analyzing the problem like it was a broken machine that needed fixing. "One hull breach and we'd all die in seconds. Explosive decompression, freezing cold, radiation. Our bodies can't handle any of it. Our technology is primitive compared to theirs. We crawl through space while they leap. We are divided. Earth is still fighting over stupid things like borders and resources. We do live short lives. 70, 80, maybe 90 years if we're lucky. Everything they said was true. Every single criticism they made was based in fact. That's what makes it hurt so much." Greg pushed his tray away, appetite completely gone. "So what are we supposed to do? Just accept it? Give up on everything humanity's dreamed about for thousands of years?" "I don't know," Danny admitted, running his hands through his hair. "But I keep thinking about something. They said we're too weak for the stars, but humans have been too weak for things before. We were too weak to fly until we built planes, too weak to survive underwater until we built submarines, too weak to go to space at all until we built rockets. Hell, we were too weak to survive winters until we figured out fire and clothing. Maybe being weak just means we haven't built the right things yet. Maybe it's not a permanent condition. Maybe it's just a problem that needs solving." The words settled into Greg's mind like seeds finding soil. Too weak meant not strong enough yet. Not strong enough right now in this moment. But that could change. Humans had always changed, always adapted, always found ways around their limitations. Maybe this was just another limitation waiting to be overcome. The Frontier entered Earth's solar system on a Tuesday morning, ship time. Every news network on the planet was broadcasting live feeds. Billions of people watched as humanity's first deep space mission came home early, carrying news that would change everything. The mission that was supposed to last 2 years had ended after just 6 months. Everyone knew something had happened. Everyone was about to find out what. Greg stood in a debriefing room in Geneva 3 days later, facing representatives from every major government on Earth. The room was packed with diplomats in expensive suits, scientists in rumpled clothes, military officers in crisp uniforms, and politicians whose expressions ranged from excited to terrified. All of them wanted to hear what had happened out there in the dark. All of them needed to know why the mission had ended early. Captain Morrison gave the report. She didn't soften any of it, didn't try to make it sound better than it was. She told them about the collective assembly appearing without warning. She told them about the mind contact, about the judgment, about every criticism that had been leveled at humanity. She told them about the threat implicit in the assembly's mercy. When she finished, playing the recorded sensor data that showed the crystalline ship's impossible movements, the room erupted into chaos. Some people wanted to mobilize the military immediately, as if Earth's weapons could do anything against beings who could cross interstellar space in seconds and communicate directly with minds. Others argued for immediate and complete compliance with the Assembly's directive. Why risk extinction over pride? What was the point of reaching for the stars if it meant humanity's annihilation? A few voices, quieter but growing louder as days passed, suggested a third option. Maybe the Assembly was right about humanity's current state, but maybe that state wasn't permanent. Maybe every weakness they'd identified was just another challenge to overcome, another problem to solve. The debates went on for weeks, then months. The world watched as its leaders argued about humanity's place in the universe. News channels ran endless discussions. Scientists published papers. Philosophers wrote books. Everyone had an opinion. Should they accept their limitations and stay home? Should they fight against beings infinitely more powerful? Should they hide in their solar system and hope the collective assembly forgot about them? 6 months after the Frontier's return, Greg found himself in another meeting. This one was smaller, more focused, more secret. Just 30 people in a secure facility deep underground in the Swiss Alps. Scientists, engineers, doctors, and soldiers. People who'd spent their careers pushing the boundaries of what humanity could do. People who didn't accept limitations easily. Dr. Helen Price stood at the front of the room. She was a small woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd led the team that developed Earth's first working fusion drive, the technology that had made the Frontier's mission possible. She'd revolutionized materials science twice and held more patents than anyone else alive. "Let me start with a question," she said, her voice clear and direct. "Does anyone in this room believe the collective assembly was wrong in their assessment of humanity's current capabilities?" Silence filled the room. No one raised a hand. No one argued. They all knew the truth. "Good," Dr. Price continued, a slight smile on her face. "Because they weren't wrong. We are fragile. Our technology is primitive compared to theirs. Our society is fractured in ways that harm us. Our lives are short. These are facts, observable, measurable facts. The question is, do facts have to be permanent? Are our current limitations set in stone, or are they simply problems waiting for solutions?" She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. Images of human history flashed past in rapid succession. Stone tools giving way to bronze and iron. Agriculture replacing hunting and gathering. Cities rising where forests had stood. Steam engines, electricity, computers, spaceships. Each image showed humanity overcoming something that had seemed impossible to previous generations. Every single one of those advances came from recognizing a limitation and refusing to accept it as permanent, Dr. Price said, her voice growing stronger. "We were limited by our physical strength, so we built tools and machines. Limited by distance, so we built vehicles and ships and spacecraft. Limited by our atmosphere, so we built rockets and space stations. Limited by our lifespan, so we developed medicine that doubled and tripled how long we could live. Humanity's greatest skill, the thing that defines us more than anything else, has always been taking our weaknesses and turning them into challenges to overcome. That's what we do. That's who we are." Admiral Patrick Moore, a man in his 60s with a chest full of medals from the Mars conflicts and 3 wars before that, leaned forward in his chair. Are you suggesting we try to fight them? Doctor, I respect you immensely, but that's suicide. You saw their ship, the sensor recordings. We have nothing that could even scratch it, nothing that could catch it, nothing that could defend against it. I'm not suggesting we fight them, Dr. Price replied calmly. I'm suggesting we prove them wrong. They said we're too fragile, we fix our fragility. They said our technology is primitive. We advance it beyond anything they expect. They said we're divided. We unite in ways we never have before. They said our lives are too short. We extend them. They gave us a list of our weaknesses, a detailed assessment of everything wrong with us. I say we use it as a blueprint for improvement. I say we take their judgment and make it obsolete. Kate, sitting next to Greg with a tablet full of notes, spoke up for the first time. Is that even possible? They've been around for 3 billion years. They've probably seen and done things we can't even imagine. How could we possibly catch up to that kind of experience and knowledge? We don't need to catch up to them, Dr. Price said, and her smile grew wider. We just need to become something they didn't expect, something they couldn't predict based on their observations. They looked at humanity as we are right now in this moment and made their judgment based on that snapshot. What if we change so much so quickly that their judgment becomes meaningless? What if we transform ourselves so completely that we're no longer the weak species they dismissed? Danny raised his hand like they were in school. What exactly are you proposing we do? In practical terms. Dr. Price's smile faded, replaced by an expression of absolute seriousness. I'm proposing we rebuild humanity from the ground up. Biology, technology, society, philosophy, everything. I'm proposing we take every limitation the collective assembly identified and systematically eliminate it. I'm proposing we show the universe that human weakness isn't a permanent state of being. It's just a temporary condition we're working on fixing. I'm proposing we become something new. That's insane, someone muttered from the back of the room. Greg didn't turn to see who. Yes, Dr. Price agreed without hesitation. Completely insane, absolutely impossible by any reasonable standard. It'll take decades at minimum, maybe centuries. It'll require resources we barely have, technology that doesn't exist yet, cooperation on a global scale that humanity has never achieved in its entire history. Scientific breakthroughs in fields we're just beginning to understand. It's impossible in every practical sense of the word. She paused, letting the weight of that impossibility sink in, letting them all feel how big the challenge was, how insurmountable it seemed. But the alternative, she continued quietly, is spending the rest of human history confined to one solar system. The alternative is knowing that the universe looked at us and found us unworthy, and we just accepted that judgment without question. The alternative is telling our children and grandchildren that we gave up on the stars because someone told us we weren't good enough. The alternative is abandoning every dream that put us on that ship in the first place. The alternative is dying slowly in our own little corner of space, always wondering what might have been out there if we'd been brave enough to try. Greg felt something stirring in his chest, something that had been dormant since the encounter, buried under depression and despair. It felt like anger at first, but cleaner than that, sharper, more focused. It felt like purpose, it felt like hope. So we do the impossible, he said quietly into the silence. Wouldn't be the first time. Humans are good at that. Dr. Price nodded, her eyes bright. Exactly, that's exactly what I'm proposing. We call it Project Phoenix. Because we're going to take humanity's ashes, all our weaknesses and failures and limitations, and we're going to make something that can fly higher than anyone ever imagined possible. The vote was unanimous. Every person in that room committed themselves to the project without reservation. They knew it might not work. They knew the odds were against them. They knew they might not live to see the results, even if everything went perfectly. But they also knew that doing nothing, accepting the judgment, giving up on humanity's dreams, wasn't an option they could live with. The collective assembly had called humanity weak. They had cataloged every flaw, every limitation, every reason why Earth's children didn't belong among the stars. Project Phoenix would be humanity's answer. not with words or weapons or arguments, with transformation so complete, so revolutionary, that the very concept of human weakness would become obsolete. They would rebuild themselves into something the universe had never seen before. Over the next 6 months, the project grew beyond anything they'd initially imagined. Governments that had been enemies for decades put aside their differences and contributed funding. Universities across the world redirected their research toward Project Phoenix goals. Corporations that competed fiercely in the marketplace began sharing technology and resources. The world watched in amazement as humanity organized itself around a single goal for the first time in recorded history. Greg was assigned to the Biological Enhancement Division, working out of a massive facility built into the mountains of Colorado. Their task was simple in concept, nightmarishly complex in execution: make human bodies less fragile, make them able to survive in environments that would kill them now, make them live longer, heal faster, endure more. Turn weakness into strength at the cellular level. The early experiments were difficult. There were failures, some of them tragic, but slowly, incredibly, they began to make progress. Nanomachine colonies that could live in human bloodstreams without triggering immune responses. Cellular reinforcement that made bones stronger than steel while keeping them light and flexible. Neural interfaces that could control the nanomachines with thought alone. Kate joined the communications network team in a facility in Singapore. They were working on something that sounded like pure fantasy: quantum entanglement communication systems that could let humans share thoughts and information instantly across any distance. No more waiting for signals to cross space at light speed. No more isolation. No more being alone in the dark. It was the kind of technology that would have been dismissed as impossible just years before. Danny headed up the Adaptive Technology Division in the orbital shipyards above Earth. His team was researching materials that could repair themselves when damaged, ships that could grow and evolve in response to their environment, systems that could learn and adapt without constant human input. They weren't building tools anymore. They were creating partners, technology that was almost alive. The work was brutal. Harder than anything any of them had attempted before, pushing every person involved to their absolute limits. There were accidents. People died in explosions, in test failures, in experiments that went catastrophically wrong. Resources ran short regularly. The world grew impatient, demanding results that couldn't come fast enough, questioning whether the massive investment was worth it. But slowly, impossibly, against all reasonable odds, progress happened. Real progress. Measurable progress. The kind of progress that made people start believing the impossible might actually be possible after all. 3 years into the project, Greg stood in a laboratory watching a volunteer's broken arm heal itself in real time. Microscopic machines flowing through her bloodstream like a river, knitting bone and tissue back together with precision no surgeon could match. The woman flexed her fingers, watching in amazement, tears streaming down her face. A week ago, that injury would have required surgery and months of recovery. Now it took less than an hour. The fragile biology the assembly had mocked was becoming something new. 5 years in, Kate made the first successful quantum consciousness connection between two human minds. Two people, separated by 1,000 miles, shared a single thought simultaneously with perfect clarity. Greg watched the readouts from the control room, seeing their brain patterns synchronize in ways that shouldn't be possible according to everything science thought it knew. When they disconnected, both volunteers were crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the profound experience of truly, completely not being alone for the first time in their lives. 7 years into Project Phoenix, Danny's team launched their first fully adaptive ship. It was small, barely the size of a private aircraft. But it was alive in ways that made traditional spacecraft look like Stone Age tools. When they sent it through a dangerous asteroid field as a test, it developed new sensors on the fly, growing them like organs. It created armor where it needed protection, dissolved it where it needed flexibility. It adjusted its shape to slip through gaps that seemed impossible. The ship returned without a scratch, and its artificial intelligence was already planning improvements for the next flight. 10 years after the encounter with the collective assembly, humanity was changing in ways that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. The first generation of fully enhanced humans walked the streets of every major city, their bodies hosting nanomachine colonies that made them stronger, faster, harder to kill, and virtually immune to disease. Quantum networks connected research facilities across the globe and throughout the solar system, letting scientists work together as if they literally shared one mind. Adaptive technology was creeping into everything from medical equipment to construction tools to everyday appliances. But the real breakthrough, the one that would change everything, came in year 15. Dr. Price called an emergency meeting of the core team. They assembled in the same secure facility where it had all begun, though they were all older now, marked by the years of relentless work. Greg's hair had gone gray at the temples. Kate wore reading glasses she didn't technically need anymore, a habit from before her enhancement that she couldn't quite break. Danny had a new scar across his forehead from an accident in the shipyards that would have killed him before the enhancements. "We've done it," Dr. Price said simply, her voice barely containing her excitement. "The fold drive works. We've created stable pathways through quantum-folded space." The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting questions, demanding to see the data, wanting to know the details. Dr. Price waited patiently for the excitement to die down before she continued with her explanation. "Space isn't something you have to slowly crawl through," she explained, pulling up equations and diagrams that looked like abstract art. "It's something you can fold like paper. We've created stable pathways through quantum-folded space using principles we barely understand ourselves. What used to take years now takes hours. What used to require generations now requires days. The collective assembly said we crawl between stars while others leap. Not anymore. Never again." Greg felt his heart racing in his chest, felt hope flooding through him like electricity. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Enhanced bodies that could survive anything the universe threw at them. Quantum networks that eliminated the isolation of space. Adaptive technology that evolved with their needs. And now, a way to cross the stars as easily as crossing a city street. They had done it. Against all odds, they had actually done it. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the collective assembly would eventually discover that they had made a terrible mistake. They had given humanity a challenge, laid out exactly what was wrong with them, precisely what they would need to overcome. And humanity had always been at its most dangerous when challenged. They were about to learn that lesson in ways they could never have predicted. 20 years after the encounter with the collective assembly, Greg Holland stood in what everyone called the bridge of the colony ship Defiance, though it bore little resemblance to traditional ship bridges. Instead of consoles and screens, he floated in a sphere of light where his consciousness connected directly with the ship's living systems. Around him, data flowed like water, beautiful and incomprehensible to anyone without the neural enhancements that let him process it all. The ship wasn't built. It had been grown over 3 years from a seed crystal no bigger than his fist, fed with raw materials and guided by human intention through quantum networks. 3 miles of living hull that could think, adapt, and heal itself. Inside were 12,000 volunteers, the first wave of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. They had been in fold space for 6 hours, crossing a distance that would have taken the old frontier decades. Greg was 52 years old now, though his enhanced body looked and felt decades younger. His cells rebuilt themselves constantly, his organs functioned with perfect efficiency, and barring violence or accident, he would probably live another 250 years at minimum. The fragile biology the assembly had criticized was gone, replaced by something that could survive almost anything the universe threw at it. "Approaching exit coordinates," the ship whispered directly into his mind. The Defiance had something like consciousness now, though calling it artificial intelligence didn't quite capture what it was. Partnership was closer. Symbiosis maybe. Through the quantum network, Greg felt Kate's presence touch his thoughts. She was aboard the Pioneer, another colony ship headed for a different star system, but the distance meant nothing to their connection. "Are you ready for this?" Her emotions flowed through the link, excitement mixed with nervousness. "We've been ready for 20 years, Greg sent back. "Time to find out if all that work was worth it." The Defiance emerged from fold space into the Proxima Centauri system, and Greg's enhanced senses drank in the data. The star burned red and angry, smaller than Earth's sun but still magnificent. 3 planets orbited it, and the second one made his breath catch in his throat even though he'd seen all the survey data. Proxima hung in space like a blue and green jewel. Oceans, continents, clouds swirling in atmospheric patterns that looked hauntingly familiar. Not quite Earth, but close enough to call home. "Survey teams begin analysis," he ordered, and felt the ship respond instantly. Thousands of nanoscale probes launched from the hull, invisible to the naked eye, spreading through the system to gather data. Within minutes, information flooded back through the quantum networks. Dr. Sophie Chen, who'd been a teenager when Project Phoenix started and was now one of humanity's leading xenobiologists, appeared in Greg's awareness through the network. "The planet is perfect." Her excitement was infectious. "Slightly higher gravity than Earth, but our enhancements can handle that easily. Water is chemically identical. Atmosphere is breathable with minor filtration. The nanomachine terraformers are already identifying local chemistry and adapting. We can begin surface operations in 8 hours instead of the projected 12. 8 hours. Greg felt something like awe wash through him. To establish a foothold on an alien world in less than a day. The collective assembly had said humanity's short lifespans made interstellar colonization impractical. They had assumed it would take generations to settle new worlds. They hadn't imagined that humanity would simply change the rules. But even as the Defiance moved into orbit and preparations began for landing, Greg felt a nagging worry at the back of his mind. They were defying the Assembly's directive, expanding beyond their solar system exactly as they'd been warned not to. So far, there had been no response, no sign that the ancient civilization even noticed or cared. But that wouldn't last forever. The first shuttles landed on Proxima B 6 hours later. Greg watched through the eyes of the landing teams, seeing the alien sky for the first time through a dozen different perspectives simultaneously. The sun was bigger in the sky than Earth's, redder, painting everything in shades that were almost but not quite right. The air smelled different, tasted different, felt different in their lungs even through the filters. But it was beautiful. Achingly, impossibly beautiful. Hills covered in something that might have been vegetation if vegetation grew in spirals instead of straight up. A forest of crystalline structures that sang in the wind. An ocean that sparkled with bioluminescent life forms that had never seen a human before and never would again after this moment of first contact. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, leading the first surface team, knelt and put her hand against the alien soil. Through the network, Greg felt what she felt. The strange texture, neither quite sand nor quite dirt. The warmth of it, the reality of it. They were here. Humans were standing on a world that orbited a different star. The dream was real. "Construction teams begin establishment protocols," Greg ordered. Within minutes, the real work began. Nanomachine swarms spread across the landing site, breaking down local materials and rebuilding them into structures. Unlike the slow construction methods of old Earth, this was fast, organic, alive. Buildings grew from the ground like plants, shaped by human thought through the quantum networks. Within a week, Proxima Colony existed. Not a camp or an outpost, but a real settlement with living quarters for 5,000 people, laboratories, manufacturing facilities, and hydroponic gardens already producing food from seeds brought from Earth. The first children born under an alien sun came into the world in a hospital that hadn't existed 10 days before. Within a month, the colony was producing more ships, smaller craft designed for exploration and defense. The manufacturing facilities worked constantly, fed by resources the nanomachines extracted from asteroids and refined with perfect efficiency. Within 2 months, Proxima Colony was home to 50,000 people, connected through the quantum network to Earth and to each other. And Proxima was just the beginning. All across human space, colony ships were emerging from fold space, claiming new worlds. Ross 128, Light and Star, Tau Ceti, Wolf 359, Epsilon Eridani. Systems that would have taken lifetimes to reach were being colonized simultaneously. The expansion was explosive, faster than anything in the historical record of any species. Greg stood on the surface of Proxima b 3 months after landing, watching the sun set over humanity's first extrasolar city. Buildings of living crystal rose into the red-tinted sky. Ships came and went constantly, ferrying people and resources. Children played in parks that grew from the ground itself. It was everything they dreamed of and more. But his satisfaction was interrupted by an urgent pulse through the quantum network. Danny's consciousness touched his, urgent and alarmed. "Greg, you need to see this. Now." Greg's awareness shifted to the survey ship Discovery, stationed at Wolf 359. Through Danny's eyes, he saw what the ship's deep scanning systems had found buried beneath 2 miles of ice on the system's third planet. Structures, massive, ancient, clearly artificial. Ruins that predated human civilization by millions of years. "How long until we can access them?" Greg asked, already knowing this could be important. Evidence of other civilizations, other species who'd reached for the stars before humanity even existed. "Excavation teams are already deploying," Danny replied. "The nanomachines can cut through the ice in days instead of years. Greg, these structures, they're huge, city-sized. Whatever built them was advanced, maybe more advanced than we are now." 5 days later, they broke through into the ruins. Greg, Kate, and Danny stood together in person for the first time in months, their enhanced bodies needing no suits despite the freezing vacuum around them, looking at architecture that made human engineering look primitive. The buildings were intact, preserved perfectly by the ice, and the technology inside still functioned after millions of years. It was Kate who found the data archives. Crystalline storage systems that activated the moment she touched them, downloading information directly into her neural enhancements. She gasped, stumbling back, and Greg caught her as the data flooded her mind. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, no, no." Through the quantum network, she shared what she'd learned, and Greg felt ice form in his stomach that had nothing to do with the frozen world around them. The archives contained a history, a warning, a tragedy written in data that had waited millions of years for someone to read it. The species that built these ruins called themselves the architects. They had been powerful, sophisticated, reaching for the stars just like humanity. And they had encountered the collective assembly at the dawn of their space age. The assembly had delivered the same judgment, called them inadequate, told them to stay home. But the architects had been defiant. They had expanded anyway, transformed themselves, built an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. They had done everything humanity was doing now, and it hadn't been enough. The archives showed the truth about the collective assembly. They weren't ancient stewards of galactic order. They were conquerors, patient and methodical and absolutely ruthless. Their strategy was refined over billions of years until it was nearly perfect. Find a species on the verge of interstellar travel, study them carefully, catalog their weaknesses, then deliver the judgment. Tell them they're unworthy, inadequate, too weak for the stars. Most species, crushed by cosmic rejection, would never leave their homeworlds again. They would turn inward, give up their dreams, and eventually fade into obscurity. But some species, the ones like the architects, like humanity, would respond with defiance. They would pour everything into proving the assembly wrong. They would transform themselves, advance their technology, expand rapidly into the galaxy. And the assembly would let them, would watch them spend decades or centuries building their civilizations. Because by the time a defiant species recovered their confidence and began expanding, the assembly had spent those years preparing. They would return with overwhelming force, studied every weakness, planned every counter to every technology. They would absorb the species into their collective if they were useful, or eliminate them entirely if they weren't. The architects had fought back. The archives showed a war that lasted over 1,000 years, fought across hundreds of star systems. The architects had been brave, clever, innovative. They had created weapons and defenses that the assembly hadn't expected. For a while they had even seemed to be winning, but the assembly was patient. They ground the architects down, system by system, world by world, until nothing remained but these frozen ruins and a warning left for whoever came after. A warning that humanity had just discovered 20 years too late. "We need to call an emergency council," Greg said quietly. "Everyone needs to know this. Now." The meeting assembled in virtual space, thousands of the most important people in human civilization connecting through the quantum network from dozens of different worlds. Dr. Price was there, now in her 80s but enhanced to the point where age meant little. Admiral Moore, commanding Earth's defenses. Leaders from every colony, every research division, every military unit. Kate presented the archive's contents. She didn't soften any of it. The room, such as it was in virtual space, fell silent as the truth sank in. They hadn't escaped the assembly's notice by expanding. They had walked directly into a trap that had been used successfully for billions of years. "How long do we have?" someone asked into the silence. Dr. Price pulled up projections based on the architect's timeline. Based on their expansion rate compared to ours, the assembly returned to their space approximately 30 years after first contact. "We're at 20 years now. If the pattern holds, we have maybe a decade, maybe less. They're probably already watching us, cataloging our technologies, planning their response." "Then we need to prepare for war," Admiral Moore said grimly. "We've spread to 97 systems in 5 years. We have resources, technology-enhanced soldiers. We're not the architects. Maybe we can win where they lost." "The architects thought that too," Kate said quietly. "They had 1,000 years to prepare and they still lost. The assembly crushed them. We have less than 10 years. "Then we don't fight them the way the architects did," Greg heard himself say. "We do what humanity does best. We adapt, we innovate, we find a third option that nobody expects." "What third option?" Danny demanded. "They're billions of years old. They've crushed every species that defied them. What could we possibly do that hasn't been tried before?" Greg felt an idea forming, wild and desperate and maybe insane. "We keep expanding. Faster than before. We spread to every habitable system within reach. We build defenses on every world. We create redundancy so deep that they can't eliminate us even if they destroy half our colonies. We become too big to kill, too spread out to contain." "Like a virus," Kate said slowly, picking up his thought through the network. "They called us a plague before, didn't they? We proved them right. We infect the galaxy so thoroughly that they can't cure it." Dr. Price was nodding. "And we keep innovating, keep changing. Every year we're different than we were before. By the time they think they understand us, we've already evolved into something new. We make ourselves a moving target." The plan took shape over the following weeks. Every resource humanity had would be poured into expansion and innovation. Every colony would become a fortress. Every ship would be armed. Every human would be enhanced to the point where they could survive almost anything. They would spread like wildfire across the galaxy, and if the assembly wanted to stop them, they would have to fight for every single world. Over the next 5 years, humanity exploded across local space with desperate urgency. 200 systems became 400. 400 became 800. Ships poured through the fold network like blood through veins. Every world capable of supporting life got a colony. Every resource-rich asteroid got mining operations. The construction never stopped, the expansion never slowed, and the technology kept advancing. Weapons that could tear space itself. Shields that bent physics in ways that shouldn't be possible. Ships that could think faster than their crews, could repair any damage in seconds, could evolve new capabilities mid-battle. Enhanced soldiers whose bodies were more machine than flesh, who could survive in hard vacuum, who could download their consciousness into new bodies if their current one was destroyed. Greg commanded the defense network from a mobile command station that jumped between systems through fold space. He watched humanity transform from an interstellar civilization into something that might actually survive contact with the assembly. Every day brought new innovations, new colonies, new reasons to hope they might actually pull this off. They came on a Tuesday morning, 25 years and 3 months after first contact. The collective assembly's fleet emerged in the Sol system, dropping out of whatever method they used for faster-than-light travel. 300 massive vessels, each one the size of a city, arranged in geometric perfection around Earth's sun. Greg felt the alert pulse through the quantum network, felt the collective intake of breath from billions of humans across hundreds of worlds. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for, dreading, rushing toward for 5 years. The assembly had expected to find humanity cowering on their homeworld, or perhaps cautiously exploring their immediate neighbors. They had expected the same pattern they'd seen 1,000 times before. A weak species, slowly building confidence, easy to crush when the time came. Instead, they found Earth protected by a defense grid that would have seemed like fantasy 25 years ago. Orbital fortresses that bristled with weapons designed specifically to counter the technology the architect's archives had described. Ships by the thousands, each one a living organism capable of adaptation and evolution. Mars, Venus, and every moon in the outer system transformed into fortress worlds. And beyond the Sol system, the assembly's scanners would be detecting the fold network connecting 800 human-controlled systems, each one defended by forces that dwarfed what Earth had managed to build. A civilization that had grown from a single world to a galactic presence in less than a generation. The assembly's message came through on all frequencies, broadcasted with the same mental intrusion they'd used before. But this time humanity was ready. Neural shields snapped into place across the network, filtering the intrusion, preventing the overwhelming presence from crushing individual minds. Species designated human, the presence declared, and Greg could hear surprise in it this time, perhaps for the first time in billions of years. You have violated our directive. You have spread beyond your world like a disease. You have developed technologies beyond your assigned station. This defiance will be corrected. This expansion will be reversed. This rebellion will be ended. Greg opened a return channel, broadcasting on every frequency, his words carried by quantum entanglement to every corner of human space. Collective assembly, you were right about us. 25 years ago, we were weak. Our biology was fragile. Our technology was primitive. Our society was fractured. Our lifespans were short. Every criticism you made was accurate. He paused, feeling the attention of billions of humans backing every word, feeling the collective consciousness of a species that had refused to accept limitation. But you made 3 critical errors. First, you assumed those weaknesses defined us permanently. You didn't realize they were just temporary challenges. Second, you assumed we would follow the same pattern as every other species you've crushed. You didn't account for human adaptability. And third, and most importantly, you gave us a detailed list of exactly what we needed to fix. You handed us a blueprint for our own transformation. The assembly's fleet began to move into attack formation, weapons that could crack planets charging with visible energy. Greg didn't flinch. Through the network, he felt Admiral Moore giving orders, felt Kate coordinating communications across 800 systems, felt Danny preparing their most advanced weapons. We rebuilt our biology. Nanomachines and genetic engineering made us stronger than steel and harder to kill than cockroaches. We revolutionized our technology. Fold drives, quantum networks, adaptive ships that think and grow and heal. We united our society. Every human is connected, working toward common goals. We extended our lives. I'm 52 and I'll probably live another 200 years. He felt the defenses activating across the Sol system, felt similar preparations happening across hundreds of other systems simultaneously. One coordinated organism stretching across light years, moving with single purpose. You came here to correct our defiance. You're welcome to try, but know this. We are not the species you met 25 years ago. We are not the primitive civilization you dismissed. We are not the weak prey you expected to find cowering on our homeworld. We are humanity. We adapt. We overcome, we evolve, and we do not accept your judgment. The first assembly ship fired, a beam of coherent energy that should have vaporized everything it touched. It met a shield that bent space itself, redirecting the attack harmlessly into the void. The defense grid responded instantly, weapons designed from studying the architect's archives firing with devastating precision. Living ships swarmed from fold points that opened like flowers across the solar system. Thousands of them, each one adapting its hull in real time to counter the assembly's weapons. each one connected to every other ship through the quantum network, coordinating with precision that made them function as a single massive organism. And across 800 other systems, humanity's defenses activated simultaneously. The assembly didn't know it yet, but they weren't fighting a single solar system. They were fighting an entire civilization that could coordinate its actions across hundreds of light years as if they shared one mind. The battle for Sol lasted 6 hours of the most intense combat humanity had ever experienced. Assembly ships were powerful, their technology refined over billions of years. But they had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that could adapt mid-battle, ships that evolved new weapons when their old ones proved ineffective, soldiers whose consciousness could transfer to new bodies when their current ones were destroyed. Greg watched 3 assembly ships fall to humanity's new space-tearing weapons, watched 2 more crippled by coordinated strikes from 100 different ships at once. But humanity paid a price too. Stations destroyed, ships lost. People dead, their consciousness backups the only thing that would let them live again in new bodies. And then, for the first time in billions of years, the collective assembly made a decision they had never made before. They retreated, not because they were defeated, but because they had realized something terrifying. Humanity wasn't fighting to win. They were fighting to learn. Every destroyed human ship sent its combat data to the network. Every tactic the assembly used was analyzed and countered. The longer the battle went, the more effective humanity became. The assembly fleet pulled back, vanishing into whatever method they used for faster-than-light travel. They left behind over 100 destroyed ships, more losses than they'd taken in the last million years combined. Humanity had lost more, thousands of ships, millions of people. But they had also proven something crucial. They could survive contact with the collective assembly. They could fight and not be instantly crushed. The cosmic judgment wasn't absolute. It could be challenged. It could be defied. In the aftermath, as damaged ships limped back to repair stations and the dead were mourned and restored from consciousness backups, Greg found himself standing on the surface of Proxima B again. The colony had grown enormous in the years since founding. Cities spread across 3 continents. Forests of Earth trees growing alongside native crystal formations. Children who'd never seen Earth playing in parks that existed on an alien world. Kate materialized beside him, her body having been restored from backup after her ship was destroyed in the battle. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "I know," Greg agreed. "But next time we'll be even stronger. That's what we do. We learn, we adapt, we grow." Danny joined them, his consciousness projecting from the shipyards orbiting New Terra where he was overseeing construction of the next generation of vessels. The assembly has been doing this for 3 billion years. They have a pattern that works, but we're breaking that pattern. We're not following their script. Over the next 50 years, humanity continued expanding, not because the threat was gone, but because stopping would mean death. 800 systems became 2,000. 2,000 became 5,000. The fold network stretched across a quarter of the galaxy. Human consciousness networks connected billions of minds across impossible distances. Technology advanced so far beyond the initial encounter that the Frontier's fusion drive was studied in museums as ancient history. Ships that could fold space themselves, needing no external network. Weapons that could rewrite physics in localized areas. Defenses that existed partially in other dimensions. Enhanced humans whose bodies were more advanced than any naturally evolved organism in the galaxy. The assembly attacked twice more over those decades. Each time with larger fleets, more advanced tactics, better prepared for humanity's tricks. Each time they were driven back, not defeated but unable to achieve their goal of eliminating the human presence. Each time they retreated having learned that humanity wasn't like other species they'd crushed. Greg was 102 years old when the assembly finally asked for negotiations. He looked 40, felt 30, and would probably live another century and a half at minimum. He stood in a virtual conference space created by the quantum network, along with Kate, Danny, Dr. Price, Admiral Moore, and 1,000 other leaders of human civilization. The assembly's representative appeared, not as an overwhelming presence but as an equal in the virtual space. A concession, Greg realized, an acknowledgement that humanity had earned a seat at the table. "We wish to discuss cessation of hostilities," the representative stated. "Your species has proven resilient beyond our projections. Continued conflict serves neither party. We propose mutual recognition and territorial agreements." Greg felt the quantum network pulse with humanity's collective response. After 3 billion years of crushing every species that defied them, the collective assembly was asking for peace. Not because they respected humanity, but because they feared what humanity was becoming. "We'll consider your proposal," Greg responded. "But understand this. We're not the weak species you judged 75 years ago. We're not going to stop expanding because you ask nicely. We're not going to limit ourselves because you think we should. The universe is vast enough for everyone, but it's not yours to control anymore." The assembly representative was silent for a long moment. "You are unlike any species we have encountered. You adapt too quickly. You refuse to follow expected patterns. You turn weaknesses into strengths with disturbing efficiency. Perhaps our initial assessment was incomplete." "Your initial assessment was accurate," Kate interjected. "We were everything you said: weak, primitive, divided, brief. But that was just a snapshot in time. You judged us based on what we were, not what we could become." "And you gave us a road map," Danny added. "Every criticism was a goal to achieve. Every weakness you identified was a problem to solve. You basically told us exactly how to prove you wrong." The negotiations lasted months. In the end, an agreement was reached. The assembly would recognize human territorial claims. Humanity would respect assembly space. Both civilizations would maintain the peace, though neither truly trusted the other. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than endless war. Greg stood on the observation deck of Horizon, a city ship 10 miles long that served as a mobile capital for human civilization. Around him, the stars spread out in every direction. Human territory now, hard-won, defended at terrible cost, but real. Through the viewport, he watched a new fold point open, another ship emerging carrying colonists to another world. The expansion never stopped. The growth never slowed. Humanity spread across the galaxy like a tide that couldn't be held back. Kate's presence touched his through the network, her consciousness reaching across 300 light-years from a research station studying exotic physics. "We did it," she sent, her emotions flowing through the connection. "We proved them wrong." "We proved ourselves right," Greg corrected. "They said we were weak. We showed them that weakness is just strength waiting to be discovered. They said we were inadequate. We showed them that adequacy is something you build, not something you're born with." Danny joined the conversation from the shipyards orbiting New Terra. "The universe declared humanity weak. Then we expanded beyond their wildest nightmares, and we're still expanding, still growing, still becoming something more." Dr. Price, now 130 years old and still working on the next breakthrough, sent her own thoughts through the network. "That's the thing about nightmares. They end when you wake up, and humanity is very, very awake now." Greg looked out at the stars, at the fold network nodes pulsing with traffic, at the ships and stations and colonies that marked humanity's presence across thousands of star systems. The collective assembly had judged them based on a snapshot, a single moment in time. They had assumed that weakness was permanent, that limitations were absolute, that inferior meant unchangeable. They had been wrong. So completely, utterly wrong, because they had misunderstood the fundamental nature of humanity. Humans didn't accept limitations. They conquered them. They didn't submit to judgment. They proved it wrong. They didn't accept weakness. They built strength from it. And now the galaxy trembled at what humanity had become, not because they were the strongest or the oldest or the most advanced, but because they were the ones who refused to stop growing, who refused to accept that anything was impossible, who turned every obstacle into an opportunity and every criticism into a challenge. The universe had declared humanity weak. Humanity had responded by redefining what strength meant, and in doing so they had become something truly worthy of the stars they claimed. The expansion continued. The growth never stopped, and somewhere out in the dark, other species watched and wondered if they too could overcome their limitations, if they too could reject cosmic judgment and become something more. Humanity had shown them it was possible, had proven that weakness wasn't forever, had demonstrated that the only real limitation was the one you accepted without fighting back. And that was perhaps humanity's greatest achievement, not conquering space or defeating the assembly or building an empire, but showing the entire galaxy that cosmic judgment wasn't absolute. That weakness could become strength. That inadequate could become exceptional. The stars waited, and humanity claimed them, one system at a time, proving with every world that they belonged among the cosmos not because they were given permission, but because they had earned it through transformation, determination, and an absolute refusal to accept limitation as destiny. But the story didn't end with the peace treaty. In many ways, it was just beginning, because humanity's expansion had awakened something in the galaxy. Other civilizations, ones that had accepted the assembly's judgment centuries or millennia ago, began to watch the humans with growing interest. The first contact with another judged species came 5 years after the treaty. The Varani, a civilization of crystalline beings who had retreated to their homeworld system 800 years ago after the assembly told them they were too fragile for space. They sent a simple message through standard communication channels. Just 3 words that meant everything. You gave hope. Kate led the diplomatic mission to the Varani homeworld. When she returned, she brought more than just a trade agreement. She brought a partnership. The Varani had technologies humanity hadn't developed, approaches to physics that came from their crystalline nature. In exchange for human enhancement technology and fold drive specifications, they offered their knowledge freely. They spent 8 centuries thinking they were inadequate, Kate explained to the Leadership Council. 800 years accepting that they didn't belong in space. Then they saw us defy the assembly and survive. They saw us prove that judgment wrong. It changed everything for them. They're rebuilding their civilization based on what we've shown is possible. The Varani were just the first. Over the next decade, 7 more civilizations emerged from isolation, all of them species that had been judged and had accepted that judgment as absolute truth. All of them had watched humanity's defiance with growing wonder. All of them wanted to know how humans had done the impossible. Greg found himself leading what they started calling the Coalition of the Defiant. 8 species, all of them once deemed inadequate by the collective assembly, now working together to explore and settle the galaxy on their own terms. Each species brought unique perspectives, unique technologies, unique solutions to problems that had seemed insurmountable. The assembly watched this development with what might have been alarm if such ancient beings could still feel surprise. Their strategy, refined over billions of years, was crumbling. They had relied on species accepting judgment, on civilizations giving up their dreams when confronted with cosmic rejection. Humanity had broken that pattern, and now others were following their example. 10 years after the peace treaty, the assembly requested another meeting. This time they didn't come with threats or demands. They came with something none of the coalition species had expected: questions. How did you overcome the fundamental limitation of biological fragility? The assembly representative asked Greg in a private virtual meeting. We have observed thousands of carbon-based species. All eventually reach a ceiling imposed by their physical nature. You surpassed that ceiling in 2 decades. This should not be possible. Greg realized something profound in that moment. Collective assembly, for all their billions of years of existence, for all their accumulated knowledge and power, had stopped innovating. They had found methods that worked and had been using them unchanged for eons. They were stagnant, frozen in patterns that were ancient when Earth's sun was young. We overcame it because we had to, Greg explained. Because you told us we couldn't. Because accepting limitation meant death. You've been powerful for so long that you forgot what it's like to need to adapt or die. We never had that luxury. Every challenge we faced was existential. Every problem we solved was a matter of survival. The assembly representative processed this in silence for several minutes. When it finally spoke again, there was something new in its presence. Something that might have been respect, or perhaps fear, or maybe both combined. We maintained galactic order for 3 billion years, it said slowly. We prevented chaos and conflict through careful management of emerging species. We believed we were providing mercy by limiting those who would otherwise destroy themselves reaching for impossible goals, but perhaps we were the ones who needed to evolve. Greg felt Kate's presence through the quantum network, felt her astonishment matching his own. The assembly was admitting they had been wrong, not just about humanity but about their entire approach to galactic civilization. "What are you proposing?" Greg asked carefully. "An exchange," the representative replied. "We have knowledge accumulated over billions of years, technologies and understanding that could advance your coalition by millennia. In return, we wish to learn your methods, how you innovate so rapidly, how you transform weakness into strength, how you remain flexible when we have become rigid." The proposal sparked intense debate within the coalition. Many argued that the assembly couldn't be trusted, that this was some elaborate trap. Others saw an opportunity to gain knowledge that would take thousands of years to discover independently. Greg found himself in the middle, trying to find wisdom in the competing arguments. In the end, it was Dr. Price who provided the perspective that tipped the decision. She was 140 years old now, her mind enhanced to the point where she could process information faster than the most advanced computers of the pre-enhancement era. "The assembly crushed the architects because the architects fought them with weapons and military force," she explained to the council. "But we're not fighting them anymore. We're showing them a different path. If we can change the collective assembly itself, if we can make them understand that rigid control is inferior to flexible growth, then we don't just save ourselves. We save every species that comes after us." The exchange began cautiously, with small delegations and limited information sharing. But as years passed and trust slowly built, the scope expanded. Human scientists worked alongside assembly researchers, comparing notes on physics and biology and mathematics. The Varani contributed their unique understanding of crystalline computing. Other coalition species added their own insights. What emerged was something unprecedented in galactic history. Not a conquest or a rebellion or a war, but a genuine collaboration between civilizations with vastly different ages and experiences. The assembly began to change, slowly incorporating human methods of rapid innovation into their ancient frameworks. The coalition gained access to knowledge that would have taken millennia to discover on their own. Greg was 120 years old when he finally retired from active leadership. He looked 50, felt 40, and would probably live another 100 years at minimum. He stood in the same observation deck where he'd first seen the assembly's crystalline ship 70 years ago, but everything was different now. Through the viewport, he watched ships from a dozen different species moving through the trade lanes. Human vessels with their organic hulls, Varani craft that looked like flying cathedrals of crystal, assembly ships that no longer seemed as alien or terrifying. All of them coexisting, all of them working together toward futures none of them could have imagined alone. Kate joined him, her physical body having arrived through fold space from a joint research station halfway across the galaxy. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who'd been through more history than most civilizations experienced in centuries. "Do you ever think about that day on the frontier?" she asked quietly. "When they told us we were inadequate," Greg smiled. "Every day. That was the day everything changed, the day humanity stopped accepting limits and started breaking them." "We were inadequate," Kate said thoughtfully. "That was the truth, but inadequate isn't permanent, it's just a description of your current state. The real question is what you do about it." Danny's presence touched their minds through the quantum network. He was on New Terra, watching his great-grandchildren play in parks on a world humans had built from scratch. "You know what I realized?" he sent. "The assembly did us a favor, they gave us a mission, they showed us exactly what we needed to become. Without that judgment we might have expanded slowly, cautiously, never pushing ourselves to transform. They forced us to become something greater." "Unintended consequences," Greg agreed. "They thought they were crushing our spirit, instead they ignited it." Through the viewport, a new fold point opened. Another ship emerging, carrying more colonists to more worlds. The expansion that had begun in defiance now continued in cooperation. humanity spreading across the stars not as conquerors or rebels, but as explorers and builders and partners in the grand experiment of galactic civilization. The universe had declared humanity weak, and in that declaration it had given humanity exactly what it needed: a challenge to overcome, a weakness to strengthen, a judgment to prove wrong. The assembly had meant it as a limitation, but humanity had transformed it into a catalyst for the most explosive period of growth and innovation in their history. And now, 70 years later, the galaxy was better for it. Not just humanity, but every species that had been told they were inadequate and had believed it until they saw what was possible. The assembly itself had learned and grown, breaking free of patterns that had become prisons. Greg looked out at the stars, at the vast network of civilizations working together, at the ships and stations and colonies that marked a new era in galactic history. The collective assembly had been wrong about humanity, but more importantly, they had learned from being wrong. They had evolved just as humanity had evolved, just as every species in the coalition was evolving. That, Greg thought, was the real triumph. Not defeating the assembly or expanding across the galaxy or developing incredible technology. The real triumph was showing that change was possible, that ancient patterns could be broken, that cosmic judgment wasn't absolute, that inadequacy was temporary and transformation was always within reach for those brave enough to attempt it. The universe had declared humanity weak, and humanity had responded by becoming strong. Then they had gone further, helping others become strong as well. And in doing so, they had changed the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself, not through conquest or force, but through example and determination and an absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible. The stars spread out before them, infinite in their possibility, and humanity, once judged unworthy of those stars, now helped steward them, not as masters or conquerors, but as partners in the grand adventure of existence. The weak had become strong. The inadequate had become exceptional. The rejected had become essential. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, other species looked at what humanity had achieved and dared to hope that they too could transcend their limitations, that they too could reject cosmic judgment, that they too could become something more than they were told they could be. That was humanity's legacy, not the territory they claimed or the battles they won or the technology they developed, but the simple, profound demonstration that weakness was not destiny, that limitation was not permanent, that the only real inadequacy was accepting inadequacy without question. The universe had declared humanity weak, and in response, humanity had expanded beyond anyone's wildest nightmares and transformed those nightmares into dreams come true.